A couple days ago I released my mobbing builds for Ultimate Freyna, and a few of you in the comments were really interested to see what I had cooking up for those Colossus side of things. Since then I've been ploughing hours into farming Death Stalker with her, as well as figuring out a more generic build to farm those solo fights in the game. With some research, some testing, and a few sips of caffeine, I'm now pleased to show you Freyna's boss killer build. In this video we'll be looking at what key pieces of gear we'll need, what modules to slot in, and even discuss those all-important unique weapons which we'll need for those public lobbies. As always, if you did learn something with this video, please consider subscribing. Should you want to see more of the Poison Queen, you won't find a better location than right here. With that out of the way though, let's get to it. Alright, as we always do then, we get to go into our module side of things. Now I do have two builds to be able to bring to you today because the solo Colossus build isn't necessarily going to help you out in the Death Stalker side of things. It just does not have the sustain, it does not have the defense, it doesn't have anything to kind of help you out in that fight. But what this excels at is like the sheer amount of damage that we can chunk out of there right at the gates. So essentially this one is going to be your solo build, this is going to be your trying to chunk enemies down in one single phase, whereas the Death Stalker bossing one is going to be more about sustain and is going to be talking about a little bit more about like resistances and everything like that. So in this case, let's talk about the solo one first and then start making our way through the build. Now you will notice two very key important things about this build. The first one is going to be one of Ultimate Freyna's brand new mods, and this is going to be Venom Injection. Now how this one works is that it changes your defense skill into a buff on cast and also a debuff on enemies that are hit. How this one works is that while your HP starts dwindling, because it will chew through your HP before it chews through your MP, is that your max skill power modifier will be increased by up to 66%. Your max toxin resistance on your character is increased by up to 250%, and your max shield recovery per second is going to be up to 5%. And then on top of that, you also have a 30% chance every time it's activated to potentially purify yourself of debuffs, which is fantastic. On top of that, it's going to apply corrosion as a debuff to enemies, which is going to reduce their toxin resistance by 25%. And while that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to do 25% more damage, because of how resistances work in this game, it essentially does mean that you're going to do more damage, and that is absolutely fantastic as well. Now the other thing that pretty much exists in this build that we've got is kind of like you haven't necessarily seen for Freyna before, is going to be Overwhelming Shield. Now how this one works is that it fixes your HP at 1 and then increases your max shield by around about 26.8% of your max HP. This shield can be increased further, and that's essentially what we're going to be doing with the Death Stalker bossing build. But with this one, essentially because you get the full buffs of your skill 2 of your Venom Injection once you're at low health, being able to constantly be at 1 HP means that we get the full benefit of that skill just from activating it, rather than having to wait around, similar to like Haley has to activate hers 16 seconds in advance. So essentially we're looking to be able to just get rolling right off the bat. So it's all about being built around that. Now, we're also looking to build into skill power as well as skill power modifiers so we can increase the most amount of damage that we can do. So by doing things like Toxic Specialist and Tech Specialist, those are going to be the default ones that we're going for. Because we're looking for a one phase, we're not looking for a cooldown as much compared to previous builds. So in this case, we've gone for just the blue mods so that it doesn't have any downsides. We have paired this up with Tech Amplification and Toxic Amplification, which are the brand new mods to be able to give us even more skill power and modifier, just at the cost of our critical hits, because we don't need to worry about those anymore. Because we've also gone into Spear and Shield as well as Venom Cinctium, we're increasing our skill power as well, which is fantastic. And then lastly, we've also gone for Dangerous Ambush, because this is just pretty much the default go-to when it comes to trying to do skill builds against those pesky Colossus that pretty much kind of like take a knee and just fall over from time to time. Now, there is one other thing that we do need to kind of really talk about is going to be skill extension. Now, to be fair, this mod doesn't need to be here. You don't necessarily need this in the build. I would probably work on this one last. The reason why is because the way we're going to set up our weaponry a little bit later, we're going to have around about an 80 to 90 shots of our main rifle. And we're able to kind of like crank all of those out within the first 10 seconds, of this skill, which is going to be its default duration. So, but what this does actually give us is a little bit more consistency. It does give us a little bit more leeway of being able to get those shots off. So, for example, if we're being targeted pretty heavily and we need to be able to take a dodge, if we need to get some behind some cover, if we need to move around some cover to be able to hit the boss, things like that, this gives us a few extra seconds so we can get off the rest of those shots. Whereas if we were activating it without this, we would have to pretty much start firing from the get-go, and then we're able to kind of like plow all that DPS out there, and it doesn't give us much leeway to be able to get those last few shots out. So that brings us on to the reactor and the components. So this is going to be the more gear side of things. So you pretty much know how the build kind of works. You've probably seen the gameplay in the background, so I don't really need to kind of like touch on that side of things. So when it comes to the reactor, we are primarily looking out for a toxic mechanics. We are going to go for a legendary one because ideally we want to be able to have a stat stick, and then we're going to use our main weapon basically to one phase, so we don't need to worry about any kind of like sustaining our weaponry or anything like that. We just essentially need something to kind of imbue ready into our skill 4. So in this case we have gone for, unfortunately it's a Greg's Reverse Fate, but essentially any weapon can kind of work here. We have gone for Toxic and Tech, as you can pretty much guess from the toxic mechanics. And then in terms of the roles, you're ideally looking for additional skill attack when attacking Colossus, and you're also looking for either a toxic skill power boost ratio or a tech skill power boost ratio. Either one of those is going to be fantastic. It's going to give you the most amount of damage that you can kind of squeeze out into your weapons, and that is going to be essentially what helps us be able to burst down everything that's going to happen. Now, we will talk about the weapons a little bit later as to why, depending on which mounting you do have, it kind of makes a difference, but ideally anything that you're comfortable with using, you're comfortable with taking out, and then also has access to the same mods that we've got a little bit later, you'll be absolutely fine with. Components wise, is it really any surprise here that it just pretty much has to be Slayer? If you're not farming the Pyromaniac to be able to get your god rolls here, then I don't know what to tell you. Essentially the game's been out long enough. These are essentially, Slayer is pretty much fantastic across most of the builds that exist in the game. Slayer is just no difference here. Essentially that 26.1% increase to our skill power is fantastic, and it also gives us that extra rounds per magazine as well, which does feed into our skill 4, so we have extra shots to be able to go. If you're looking for rolls, it shouldn't really matter because like I said, you're trying to burst people down within basically one single phase or one single activation of your skill, so it shouldn't matter too much. But if you are looking for things, then MP recovery out of combat and max HP, max MP recovery in combat, and then defense, and preferably an MP modifier that pretty much exists in here as well. I've not managed to find my god roll for this one just yet, but essentially that's what you would like to be able to have in there. And then lastly, just anything. It doesn't really matter too much because max shield is okay, but that's about the only sustain that you can kind of get from there. Now, weaponry-wise, we will talk about the Greg's Reverse Fate because you can see as to why this is currently linked up, but this pretty much houses the 4 mods that we're going to be using anyway. You need to essentially have a maxed out sharp precision shot. Basically, as long as you hold down the trigger once you manage to use your skill 4, you'll constantly ramp up your rate of fire, and it will eventually be so fast that you'll get through all of your shots within 10 seconds. We then also have increases to our magazine which carry over, so compulsive magazine and expand weapon charge. And then lastly, fire rate up does transfer over, and that is just a flat 25% increase, and really does kind of help out with the mitigation of the downside of sharp precision shot. So you are still starting off at a 5% increase to your fire rate, and then it gets even faster after that as well. So that's the basics for the solo Colossus guide. That's going to be your one phase. So what about the bosses that are very resistant to your poison? What about, you know, public map lobbies? What about Swamp Walker? And what about Death Stalker specifically? Well, that's why I've got this build for you, and that's going to be our DS bossing side of things. Now, this one does have quite a few changes to it, and the reason why is because those boss fights go on a little bit longer, so therefore we need some kind of sustain added into the build. Now, talking about the stuff that has stayed the same, we can see that we do have Venom Injection, you can see that we do have Overwhelming Shield, and then once again, that's going to be proccing off so that we have our buffs pretty much right off the get-go after we activate our skill 2. We also have a focus on Toxic instead of because we would kind of need a little bit of skill cooldown to help us out here, because these fights go on for longer, so therefore the faster we can get our skill 4 back to help us out, the better essentially this build kind of feels. We also have Toxic Amplification because once again, that's going to help us out. We've been able to do extra skill damage or skill power into our skill 4 is fantastic. I would recommend being able to slot those two. Now we have took the other two away, so we've got less modifier, but because of how the modifiers are already high enough anyway, it doesn't matter too much. It's not like we're losing a fat lot of damage. Essentially, these two together will give us plenty of damage for us to kind of like chuck out there. And then we're also leaning more into the Overwhelming Shield, so we are looking to give ourselves a little bit more sustain. So in this case, we have gone for increased shield, so that gives us an extra 150% increased shield. We also have gone for increased HP, and the reason why we've gone for increased HP over a different shield mod is if I actually do show you, for example, if I've got my increased HP, you'll notice that I'm currently sitting at just shy of 8.4k shield. If I then take that off and then go into if I actually type shield correctly and then go into the main one that people are starting to use, which is HP conversion, if I then use that, you'll notice that I'm much less. So it doesn't really make any sense to be able to go for that. Weighing the scales, I believe, also comes less. So yeah, in terms of like what mod you kind of want to put in here to be able to kind of help with Overwhelming Shield, increased HP seems to be the way of being able to go about it. Now, I do believe that this might be a combination of time distribution as well as the gear that we do currently have equipped. So with the Slayer set, it's giving us some HP, and I do think potentially that's the reason why it's kind of going the way it is rather than giving a shield. But it could be a number of reasons. To be honest with you, I haven't looked too much into that side of things, so feel free to leave that in the comments if you know exactly the reason why for that. To really round up the shield side of things though, you will notice a brand new mod that we've not featured in a build before, and this is going to be Biosync Shield. Now, it's a bit difficult for us to be able to kind of say really quickly, but essentially how this one works is that it gives you a little bit of help with being able to keep your shield active. You'll notice that when you go into a firefight, you won't have any balls that will kind of like drop on the floor to be able to help you out with that side of things. Obviously HP balls help, obviously blue MP balls help to be able to help you with like keeping your skills active as well as keeping your HP alive, but there's nothing that can be dropped to be able to help you shield wise. That's where this mod comes in, because being able to pick up a HP orb now gives you 70% of what you would have recovered back into your shield. This is especially useful on things like Death Stalker because essentially you will take a few hits with this build. You will potentially get close a couple of times to being able to fall on the floor, and what this one essentially does is that if you realize you're in that kind of state, you can actually, instead of relying on your skill 2 being able to give you your shield back quite quickly, you can actually go run over, pick up some red HP balls, and you can get yourself back in the fight that way. So it just gives you a little bit of flexibility. I do think this is quite nice. It's not necessary. You could always change the cerulean side of things here and go for additional shield if you really want to, but I feel like this gives you a nice bit of utility in that fight, and I do think it kind of has a space for this side of things. And then lastly, we do have a bit of a package which we do need to talk about, which is going to be our Toxic Antibody as well as our Perfect Anti-Venom. Now, the reason why is because the bosses that I've specifically made this for are going to be Toxic based, because they're going to be resisting our abilities. They're going to take a lot more damage, they're going to take a lot more punishment, and essentially we're going to be receiving that dots and those damage over times, and we're going to take a bit of damage coming our way. So the reason why we've gone for these is to increase our toxic resistance as much as possible, so that essentially we can just laugh at all the attacks that are going to to be coming our way. With this package, we are able to essentially take several hits from Death Stalker, which is fantastic. But on top of that, we are also immune to poison, so any damage over time that would be applied to us does not happen anymore. So it gives us some really good staying power in that fight. And then combined with the fact that we get 250% increased toxin resistance from our venom injection as well, we kind of just laugh in the face of Death Stalker when he tries to attack us. So toxic antibody and perfect anti-venom is fantastic for those fights. I highly recommend that you do slot those in for this build. So reactors wise, it does change a little bit from the solo Colossus side of things, because we will be going back and forth between two separate guns. The reason why is because in this case I do go back and forth between my Secret Garden and my Enduring Legacy. My Enduring Legacy is set up for sustained DPS. It's set up so I can just basically start chunking the boss while I wait for my skills to come back, and then my Secret Garden is set up for my skill 4, so I'm able to get the most benefit out of that skill, so I can just constantly go back and forth between the two that way. To do that though, unfortunately, as it currently stands, because until we get that update, I have to rely on a purple reactor instead. This does mean I am losing out on some skill power, but just for the time being, it's unavoidable. But essentially, we are looking for a Toxic Mechanics reactor. This is the one that I do use. This does come with toxic and tech skill power boost ratios. We're also looking for that at the very bottom, additional skill attack when attacking Colossus, as well as tech skill power boosts. This is going to give us the most amount of damage as well with all of our skills. And because of that, it essentially means that we can take our third category right here, and I can just slot in whatever class it needs to be, because I don't need to have it constantly out and in my hands. I can constantly go back and forth between these two, and I don't need to worry about my skill power being reduced in that sense. And I still get all the benefits of that additional skill attack on Colossus, as well as the tech skill power boost ratios. So components wise, you do actually have a couple of options here. I will say Slayer is still absolutely fantastic for this fight. Because of the roles with MP recovery and max MP and recovery in combat and out of combat and everything like that, you do find periods in this fight where you will be considered out of combat, and you will massively regenerate your MP even while your skill 2 is active. It doesn't treat you as in combat with that skill active. So this is fantastic. It essentially allows you to get pretty much everything that you need back. In terms of that though, while Slayer is fantastic for your skill 4, just keep in mind that Death Stalker will resist all of your attacks. So if you don't want to go for skill power, instead you can go for something like Annihilation. Annihilation will essentially help you out with your firearm attack instead, because you're always going to be on low HP. You'll essentially get that firearm attack increase, which is quite nice. Just keep in mind that this will hinder your MP recovery, which is a bit of a shame, but you know, that's still something that you do need to factor in. The last of the choices though, after you've got a few runs under your belt, is going to be the Distorted Resolve. I've yet to actually get a proper 4-piece for this to kind of like test this out, but everything that is listed on this sounds fantastic. Being able to increase your toxic skill power, being able to recover shield, and then being able to fire off additional projectiles that basically weaken the Colossus as well. It sounds fantastic on paper. Once I get a proper setup going, I do think this probably might even be best in slot for it. I do think it's fantastic. So yeah, but that one's yet to be tested out on this channel just yet. And then lastly, that just leaves us to talk about the weaponry side of things. So we do have, like I said, we've got the 2 weapons that I do go for. So for example, with my Enduring Legacy, this is the one that I'm going to be using to shoot, to be able to, while I'm waiting for my skills to be able to come back from cooldown. This is going to be my main damage dealer. And as you can see, this is how I currently have it set up. So we have gone for firearm attack here. We have gone for critical hit damage, which you should be going for with Enduring Legacy. Enduring edging shot, as well as better insight to increase our critical hit rate. Expand weapon charge to increase the amount of bullets. The reason why is because mental focus, it needs to get up to 150 stacks, and as standard it doesn't actually get up to 150 bullets, so you can never actually reach it. So without that, you'll never actually reach the full maximum benefit of this mod, but I do think that's the best one for it. We then also have fire enhancements to then give us a chance of being able to proc our unique ability, so we do more damage, and then fire rate up is going to be obviously just increasing our fire rate. So I do think this is probably one of the best setups that does exist for the Enduring Legacy. And then alternatively, once we start going through our skill rotation, once our skill 4 does come back off cooldown, we then swap over to our Secret Garden. Essentially, with the main mods that we're looking out for are going to be Sharp Precision Shot as before, Compulsive Magazine, Expand Weapon Charge, and Fire Rate Up. Everything else in between, you feel free to be able to put whatever you want on there, but me personally, because this does have high crits, I will go for Firearm Attack as well as critical hit damage, and then just increase the critical hit rate to make it a little bit more consistent in that critical hit department. So editor's note, there is actually one additional thing that I completely forgot to be able to put in my original script, and I think it is worth talking about. This is going to be the Season 1 Inversion Reinforcement thing, so if we click on over to here, there are a few buffs that are absolutely fantastic to be able to add in here, and what I've noticed, like looking around the buffs or the builds that exist in the community, no one seems to really be talking about this, and I do think this adds so much to the build, especially for Death Stalker. So if we have a quick look as to what exists in here, I would recommend being able to go for Hunt, Attribute, and Recovery. These are going to be the main ones that are going to give you massive amounts of boost, and I do think they give you the best out of all 5. Being able to go into Hunt, I do think that the best one, if you are going for your boss in build, is going to be Shield Particle Augmentation. This is when you defeat an enemy that exists inside the arena, you're going to get additional shield by up to 5 stacks of 6.6%. This is absolutely fantastic, especially if you are clearing out some of the adds that do exist in the battlefield to be able to get those HP and those MP drops. Being able to get this passively will then give you a nice, really big, decent chunk. I think this works out to be around about 33% increased shield just from being able to kill some enemies that exist, which you're going to be doing just as general anyway. So this is just a really nice way to be able to increase the amount of shield you have. On top of that, going for attribute side of things, we are going for high density toxic particle membrane. If you're aiming down sights, this is allowing you to be able to get every 0.5 seconds, gain a stack of up to 6.5% of toxin resistance. Fantastic for Death Stalker, fantastic for Swamp Walker. Being able to get this up to an additional 13% of your toxin resistance is really going to help you be able to tank some of those hits, and some of the clips that you've seen in the background you can really see as to how much pain, how much punishment we're able to take with that. One key thing to note is that if you do have this active, you will also gain composite element particle membrane, which is going to give you an additional 7.2% old tribute resistance, which is fantastic. So as you can see, we're essentially getting 20% increase to our toxic resistance just from being able to do that, which is crazy. The last one that I would recommend is going to be in the recovery slot, and this is going to be selective neurostimulation. Getting this one gives you a chance of being able to get some of your MP back. Every single minute you're essentially going to get some back, whether it's a case of 5.2, 9.1%, or even 11.7 and increasing your HP. I don't think the HP kind of helps with the shield. But still, it is a fantastic way to be able to keep some of your MP fully charged up, especially seeing as that venom injection is going to be draining you constantly. So this is a great way of being able to keep that maintained, along with obviously the MP balls that do exist out there. Just note that you will get all these extra buffs that do exist. So for example, if while you do have your shield particle augmentation active, you will receive 2% less damage incoming to yourself, which is a small boost, but you know, it's still something. Every little helps kind of here. And then alternatively with the recovery, when you land a firearm critical hit, you have a 9% chance to be able to get hyperdimensional vision, which removes debuffs from you for 3 seconds and also grants debuff immunity for the duration, which is a great way of being able to get around Death Stalker with all the debuffs that are going to be coming your way. So either way, I do think this is the best way of being able to go about it, especially with Death Stalker, but this is definitely worthwhile being able to slot into your build, and I highly recommend that you get these ones unlocked. And that pretty much wraps it up. I'm absolutely loving the change in power that Freyna's received. In the past, it used to be a throw if you brought it into one of these fights, but now that she's up there with being some of the best DPS and sustain in these fights when you build her just like this. So get out there and abuse a set while you can. But this is a section I want to hear from you. How are you finding the first Descendant? Are you still looking forward to Season 2? And do you have the Venom Injection module already? Let me know all that and more down below. Massive thank you for making your way to the end of the video. And as I always say, keep yourself safe, keep yourselves well. I'll see you all on our next video.